Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. I am so excited to have Delonte Harrod in the studio with me today. He is the founder, editor, reporter. He's the everything to the Intersection magazine, which covers Prince George's County. And I'm really excited to see a lot of these small publications crop up to cover some specific areas. And so today we're going to delve in with Delonte and let you all know about what's happening in Prince George's. So welcome, Delonte.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. So tell us about Intersection and gosh, how you do it all, because this is it's a lot to be a one-man band for sure. So tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about the magazine and how you started.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to do it all.
Okay, good.
Right.
Transparency. Here we are.
Right. Yeah, the intersection was founded uh first after I left a military publication. So the initialness of it started in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I posted my first article on medium.com. That's where the first website was hosted. And so then after that, it just wanted to make it an LLC. So about 2 years later, I made it an LLC. And then got into the Google News Initiative
Mm-hmm.
as a fellow. Received some funding from them. Was a fellow at the Minute Institute.
Mm-hmm.
All those fellowships were really helpful. And so the story behind starting the intersection is really just trying to keep it as simple as possible because I can talk really long about this. But
It's your passion. Mm-hmm.
right, the story behind it was just to create another avenue to cover Prince George's County residents, specifically Black people in Prince George's County. If for your listeners who may not know, Prince George's County is probably about 60% Black, a little
Mm-hmm.
over 60% African American. And so specifically, what I wanted to do was to create a publication that was rooted in two things: narrative reporting, probably three things: solutions oriented reporting,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps maybe more importantly, um, reporting from from the perspective of the community members who are looking for solutions or actually doing things in their communities to solve their own problems. And here's what I mean by that. Most of the time, a lot of times, when media outlets come to cover Black communities,
Mm-hmm.
they come to cover after the effect. So a lot of interviews are reactionary
Mm-hmm.
to whatever has happened. And so what I was thinking was that, okay, so Black people have been living in spaces that have not been generous to their living for a long time, and in those spaces, Black people have come up with solutions to those problems. So my thinking was, if we have come up with our own solutions, then I should be reporting from that perspective
Mm-hmm.
and not waiting for, usually most of the time these solutions end up becoming policy in a neighborhood, a county, or city. And that's when the journalists come to cover it. But what has happened is that it was the activists or the everyday community member who showed up, who had those fresh ideas, pushing those ideas forward, and they end up becoming policy.
Mm-hmm.
So again, what I wanted to do was start from that place and then report from that place. So that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
Mhm. So, just on a mechanical sense, I think there's so much to unpack there, but I wanted to start with sort of on a mechanical basis, you are looking at a topic or an issue, and do you go about it as sort of topics and issues and then finding out what's happening in the community and what's bubbling up? Or do you start with a compelling story or a compelling person in the community?
Mhm.
Because you're only one person, so you're not, it's
Yeah.
not like you're covering it's not like you're pumping out 10 stories a day. So, like, what
Right,
does that
right,
look like?
right. That's a, great question, and I think most of the time it is not mostly just sometimes it's not a topic. So one of the ideas behind the intersection is to report from an integrated standpoint.
Mm,
So,
what does that mean?
so yeah, good question, good follow up question. So, what I mean by that is that the way that we typically live our lives is our faith, our politics, how we think about the world is actually all integrated into one.
Mhm.
And so, whatever we think about the world, how we see the world, that informs everything that we do the food we eat, how we travel, where we're going to live, what education we have. And so, traditional journalism like breaks those categories up where reporters have beats, right? And so,
Right.
right? So sometimes a business beat is not the local government covering beat, right? Those are usually two or three separate reporters,
Mhm.
depending on how big the local government is. And so what I've thought about is that traditionally the way that Black people move in the world is that these things are all integrated. So the example I like to use is whenever sometimes you go to a protest, what's often not covered is the things that happen before the protest actually starts.
Mm,
And
mhm.
usually that is some spirituality aspect. There's prayer, depending on what the religion is. If it's like African spiritualities, there may be some what they call a drink libation going or
Mhm.
whatever, and then the protest happens. But what happens in traditional news, that doesn't get covered. That first part doesn't get covered because it's in my mind, I think it's seen as something that's not a part of what actually happened. Those are two separate things. So if
Right.
we want to report on that part, we should get a religion reporter,
Got it. Right. No, that
right?
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And so the idea is that um, just covering Black communities for over 20 years and just being in communities is like, oh, like you could be talking to somebody and they start bringing up their religious their religion about why they are approaching this the way that they are, or some transcendence, right? And so
Mhm.
what I found is that what I wanted to do was create a news organization that also reports from that perspective. So that's a long answer to it. Right? So I think the thing is not pretty much a topic, but it really is reporting, trying to report from a more human standpoint.
Right.
So even if I am going to cover like a government, um, it's like a local government issue,
Mhm.
and I'm showing up at the Prince George's County council member or whatever, council hearing or whatever, um, I'm trying to think about or listen for the humanness in that space
Mhm.
and trying to report as those people see themselves and not how I want to see them. And so I'm asking questions along those lines.
Mhm. Well, and I do feel like that's such a it's an intersection for sure, and it's a novel or really unique way of looking at the world that's really not that like, that is the way
Right,
people show up, but
right,
it sort of transcends these silos that we put ourselves into
right,
and, makes a lot of sense. And I think also because you're working with just yourself as a reporter and maybe some contributors and things like that,
mhm,
in some ways it's easier to hold all of those multitudes in your head because
right,
you don't have to say, "Oh, well, this is your bailiwick over here." And
right.
have you found it in some ways very freeing to tell the stories that you want to tell in this way?
Yeah, I have. I'm not really concerned about um I mean, for the most part, I'm just editing for grammar. Like
Mhm,
I'm not trying to edit people's lives out. Um, I'm just trying to show up the way that they show up.
mhm,
Um, because I just think that as a reporter, I don't get to choose how you want to portray yourself in public. My
mhm,
job is to show up and hopefully portray you as you portrayed yourself in that space, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, like I don't, yeah, it's more freeing, and I just think it just when people see that, I hope that when people see that, they see themselves in the story.
Well, and
Um,
you and I met at American Press Institute's, local news summit, and
right,
what you were saying really kind of, just reminds me of something that, was a really big theme during that time, where news media as a caretaker is evolving from a gatekeeper to a caretaker function,
right,
and it feels
right.
like you're really, um embodying that, and was that always sort of you grew up in military newspapers, that's where you, came when you first started that. Can you describe sort of that evolution in your own mind and sort of what prompted you to say back in 2018 and then be so committed to it that you formed an LLC in the pandemic year? Um, what was your evolution of thinking, and why did you feel like this was the way to go? Because this is probably not an easy life.
Right. No, so I think so backing up a little bit, I first got my start in a newspaper in Dallas, Texas.
Mhm,
When I was at a HBCU, I was freelancing for it's a historic black newspaper that's actually still exists called the Dallas Examiner.
mm,
And so when I was there, I was trained by a journalist named Gordon Jackson, probably one of the best journalists that I've ever been around. Um, and so being in that space and reading about the traditional black press, there's always been like this tradition of telling stories and
mhm,
rooting black people's narratives in those stories. So that's where I first learned that. And then I'm in the community, and when I have to go and cover things, these are how black people are showing up in the community in public spaces. And so when I'm there, I'm like, okay, as a reporter, like if you're doing a, a drink libation, maybe that should be in the article. And then my editor never edited that out. Like I was never told that I shouldn't report on that.
mm,
Um, it wasn't until I went to other publications that I was like, oh, you probably shouldn't do that. Like you probably shouldn't report that.
mhm,
But that always kind of stayed with me. And I've always thought that like if I start my own publication, I just want to continue on that tradition. And
mhm.
um I don't want to do away with that kind of reporting because I also think it's actually needed.
Well, and I
Yeah,
wanted to ask you because, like, the idea of spirituality and sort of the religious aspect of people's motivations in their life, and certainly in the Black community, that's
mhm.
not that it's not in other communities, but there's
Right, right,
such
right.
a deep spiritual tradition, and religious tradition in the Black community. What, why do you think that news outlets kind of shy away from discussion of religion? It's a major societal institution. Like
I mean,
you would
as we can
cover
see, yeah, it's
I mean, you'd cover it like you would government or something. So why do you
right,
think there's
right.
that absence or that silence?
Yeah, so I think part of it is because like newspapers don't want to seem like they're proselytizing,
Mm,
right? Like they don't want to see that they're giving um some kind of like we're favoring this kind of religion or whatever it is, right? And I think also like I don't think this is true about everybody, but I think this is true in just as a society as a whole. I think that we don't know enough about religion to report on it. We
mm,
don't actually know how to write about it. And we don't know how to like make sense of it in a very I mean, because journalism is very objective, right?
mhm,
Appears to be objective, right? And so when people are talking about religious experiences, and also along lines of their politics, well, how do you report on that? How do you understand that? How do you help to make sense of that, right?
mhm,
And so I think it's one of those things where that kind of doing that kind of reporting can seem confusing. And I think it will be easy to say, okay, I heard you say this about spirituality, but you also said this about politics. So if you want to talk about that, we could talk about that later, but we're going to focus on the political aspect of that.
Mhm.
Right. And so I just think it's one of those things where, it's probably been in like maybe the last, at least from what I understand, I could be wrong about this, but religion reporting as a beat has just taken off within the like maybe like last 20 years, maybe
Mhm.
30. Um yeah, so that's what I think. I just think that there is this this idea of not wanting to seem like the newspaper or the digital publication is proselytizing all, and also like how do you understand religion in that
Right.
sense?
And do you get sucked into this black hole of someone's belief structure when all you're really trying to do is figure out, like, what brought you to the protest? Maybe you
Right.
don't wanna get into, like, this deep, deep
Right.
conversation.
Right.
Do you think
And
there's
yeah,
fear there?
right. And I think I don't even actually think you need to do that, right? I don't think you need to actually, I mean, those could be other pieces as we have seen in the last couple of years, those things have really taken off. But if a person is just talking about their faith and how their faith informs what they're doing, to me, that's just a simple reporting. Like it's
Mhm.
just like you're not diving into like, do you read the Bible every day? Do you pray 5 times a day? Like you're not, like do
Right.
you go to some do you worship some shrine or something? Like you're not asking those questions unless they bring it up. But most of the time it's just people just mentioning what they think about this divine being that's informing what they're doing.
Mhm.
Like that's just how I see it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I will leave religion in just a second, but I'm
No, it's
interested
fine.
to know, like, if you, had any words of wisdom or advice that you would give reporters out there in the world as it relates to covering religion or integrating religion into stories, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would say um first re-reporting that has actually done that before you actually go out and do it. Read some journalist who has done that kind of reporting so that I can inform how you actually write about it. I remember when I was at the National Association of Black Journalists, and I was talking to we were doing George Curry, who was a black journalist. He's deceased now.
Mhm.
Was giving a presentation. He wrote for like the Time magazine and stuff like that. And I asked him, I said, "What makes a good writer?" He's like, "Reading.
Mm.
Reading makes you a good writer." He was like, "If you want to be a great writer, read." And so I think for the journalist who wants to report on an integrated life, who wants to approach reporting from a standpoint of integration, of human integration, then I would say read writing that does that.
Mhm.
Um, you can't do that unless you see it or you read it. So that's what would be my first thing. And then I would say, when you show up, be curious, right?
Mhm.
Ask follow-up questions. A person says something that you don't understand, and I think this is just traditional journalism anyway,
Mhm.
right? A person says something you don't understand, be curious. What do you mean by that? You say this, how does that impact your life? And give them a chance to share what they really mean instead of just being in a rush to cut that out. And I know reporters don't sometimes, I'm at a different position. I am the reporter and editor, but I know some reporters don't get to edit their stuff. It goes to an editor, but just also having that conversation with your editor.
Mhm. Okay, that
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Intersection Magazine and where people can find it and sort of what is some of the, what you're trying to do and where to get it. So tell us a little bit about where you're hosted now, because I think you have a Substack as well as
Right.
a website.
Yeah. So the website, it's at www.theintersectionmag.com.
Mhm.
Also, what comes with that, as soon as you go to the website, you an invitation to sign up for the newsletter will pop up. The newsletter is hosted at Substack, and so what I wanted to do, it's kind of like it's two products, right? So the website itself hosts the content of what has been reported.
Mhm.
The newsletter, it's really for to give Prince George's County residents um an update on the community meetings that are taking place by local government officials. Also, nonprofits, when they have meetings and stuff for the community and stuff, there's also stuff in there about legislation that may have passed or being
Mhm.
that is going to be passed and things like that. Sometimes I put what I've a section called community notes where sometimes community members will write to the newsletter and say, this is what I want to say. And sometimes these are short little notes or whatever. And I'll put that in there and tag the person that said that. So yeah, so the newsletter is really for helping Prince George's County community members get involved in local government and
Mhm.
making them aware. One of the things that I found, there was a study done by the Greater Washington Community Foundation
Mhm.
that said that Prince George's County residents believe that or don't believe that their local government is well, let me say it this way. Wants their local government to be more transparent and
Mhm.
things like that. And so what I thought about is that okay, what would my newsletter look like if I compiled all of the meetings that the local government has? Because it's on their websites, and
Right.
sometimes residents just talking to residents, they don't actually go to the website sometimes. So
Mhm.
just compiling it there, just putting it in a newsletter and shipping it out. Yeah.
Mhm. So, I love this idea of you're reporting from sort of a very grassroots level in many
Mhm.
respects, and you're providing information, to the community that they say they need. Have you done, readership how do you know what the community wants? Is that just from being embedded in the community, or do you do surveys and focus groups and sort of all the pieces, there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one is being embedded in community and just having like little conversations with people.
Mhm.
Um, And then when I first initially started, part of the requirement for being a fellow at the Google News
Mhm.
Institute was I had to do some groundwork and talking to people, see what their needs are, see what they were interested in, and it was across. I mean, even now when I got on report, people would say to me like, "I just can't find a place where I can get like." Information on like where these government meetings taking place, what time and all that stuff. Even now,
Mhm.
I actually just had that happen to me. So I point him to the newsletter and say, hey, it doesn't have everything, but it has some things that you could read that could be helpful to point you in the right
Mhm.
direction. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both of me being in the community and also doing that initial survey, one that I have to actually update. So
Well, and I also feel like, people kind of jump into this work and jump out. Like they're not always so you're constantly evangelizing in some ways, like here's this information, here are the ways that you can get involved. Do
mhm.
you feel like because, so much do you feel like there's a lot of mistrust in the community towards government? Like, why wouldn't they just go and be like, "Oh, well, if I wanna know what Prince George's County's doing, maybe I better look on their website." Why do you think they're not are they looking on the website, or is it obfuscated in some way, or do they just not trust what's on that website?
Yeah, so I don't it could I mean, I actually can't objectively answer that question,
Mhm,
but I do think that, like, sometimes I mean, Prince George's County is a county where, like, you know, people are working, like, 60 to 80 hours, like,
yeah.
they're heavily working and sometimes don't have time maybe sometimes don't have time to go to the website, right?
Mhm.
And maybe looking for a more easier access. Sometimes local government websites can be hard
Oh, for
um,
sure. Yeah.
to work through, right? If you got to click like 3, 4 times to get to one thing that you want to see, that could be hard and time tasking. And so
Mhm,
I think it's one thing of like, where can I go where it makes it easier for me to look for it, to
mhm.
just see it, right? Where can I go to this one space? I think it may be a little bit more than that. Um, it may be a issue of not trusting the government website, but again, I can't objectively say that because I haven't done that kind of survey work.
Right. No, that makes sense. I was just curious because,
Yeah.
in some ways, although I can never find the information that I'm looking for when I'm on a county website, there's just too many things going on.
Right, right, right.
So when you were first starting up the intersection, you said that you were a Google News Initiative fellow. You took on a couple fellowships. Can you tell me a little bit about what those fellowships were and how they affected the development of the intersection and sort of what you
Mhm.
learned?
Yeah, so both of those fellowships were rooted around media entrepreneurship. And so, um, the thing that I've learned in both of them was, one, how to be an entrepreneur, a media entrepreneur.
Mm,
Uh, that's that was essential. Um, and so it also taught me that I'm coming in as a reporter trying to run a media organization, which, as you know, like if you're a reporter, you're not taught how to run. That's
right.
not your training in journalism school, right? And so I had to learn that, okay, if I'm going to do this, I also need the kind of skill set that it would take to run a media organization. So I learned how to do surveys and learn how to like I'm not just going reaching out to the community in this capacity to do an interview, but I'm actually reaching out to the community to listen. So I had to learn a different kind of listening skill, right?
Mhm,
Where I'm not all the time listening now to report a story, but I'm actually listening with a concerned ear about what kind of products that I need to actually put out and how
mhm,
can I make this product better, right, for you, right? It's also I had to learn, and we also talked about this in both of the fellowships, um, how to raise funds, how to do grant
mhm,
making, how to talk to people when you're in certain rooms, what language that one needs to use while you are in those spaces and things like that,
mhm.
because it's a very different arena, and things like that. So those are some of the things I learned, which have been really, really helpful to me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and I love the idea of kind of a different type of listening as well. I mean, some of the like how to fundraise, how to write grants, those are very, kind of like, okay, transactional skills that like, yep, you need to do that.
Right.
How to switch language and demeanor when you're in different spaces. That I'm interested in that. I want to get back to that. But that idea of listening in a less
Mhm.
I think of reporting sometimes in a transactional listening way that you're listening
Right.
for, like, okay, here's details, here's the crux, here's the scoop. And now
Right.
you're kind of almost like stepping back and listening
Right.
in a more holistic way about needs and desires and subtext. So,
Mhm.
w- and that's just another form of code switching in some ways. So, like,
Right.
how does that feel? Like, was that a difficult skill to acquire, or was it more natural than you thought?
No, that thank you. I don't as you were talking, I was thinking about this, like, was it so I think that the journalism skill set, because we should be listening anyway, right?
Mhm,
um, I think the journalism skill set helped me, like at least with the introduction. But what I also found is that, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody else. Like when when I was going out and when I still go out and talk to people or I'm introducing the publication, people tend to be excited. Like, oh, you're starting your own media company. And so they're asking me, like, tell me more about that.
Oh.
And so it makes that part of it easier
Mhm,
because I thought that I would be they wouldn't be inviting as they are, but they have been, like, so it makes the conversation easier and I can relax a little bit more because it is a presentation in a
mhm,
conversational way, but it's actually not a presentation. It's also not a presentation because I'm really just talking to a community member about what I'm doing.
mhm,
Right. And so I think that's the thing that I found to be a lot surprising, that people were a lot more encouraging than I actually thought they would be.
mhm,
So they invited me when I said, again, when I'm saying to them, hey, I'm starting this media organization. They're like, tell me more. And how can I support it? Where do I go to support it? And what kind of things do you do? And so then we have this very organic conversation about what I'm doing and how they can get more involved and stuff like that. So
Oh, that sounds great. And like, were people asking like questions that you were not yet prepared for? Like when you're starting something up, I always feel like, okay, I've got this next step. I'm ready here, but don't ask me about steps, 20 through 25 because I'm not
yeah,
there yet. Don't know.
right,
Uh,
right.
did were people like painting the walls before you had built the foundation in those
Yeah, I
conversations?
mean, yeah, of course. Like I saw. Then you kind of jump into like, okay, now that I've told you I've started a news and media organization, you might have this thing in your mind about how you imagine that is. And
Mhm,
so then I have to like bring the conversation back and say, okay, these are the things that I do and these are the things that I don't do. So we don't do breaking news. So if you are coming to the website hoping that it will be updated daily, then that's not something that we do. But there are other organizations do. So then I get into explaining why I don't do that, right?
mhm,
'Cause I'm not trying to reinvent. I'm not trying to do the same thing other people are doing, right? And so there is this kinda, there's this kinda like, push and shove or this push and pull or whatever it is,
mhm.
in the conversation where you have to say, "This is what I'm doing, this is what I'm not doing," and then explain the reasons why you don't do it. And so, yeah, that also has been encouraging. Um I mean, at least not to my face, I haven't heard anybody say like, "That's crazy." Like,
Well, good, good, and you've been around for a while, so I feel like the "Delonte, you're crazy" comments, that would have happened early on.
right.
So,
Well, I mean, I will say this, like, I remember being in a cohort and telling folk like, "Hey, like, I think that, I'm going to, have this." The people were asking like, "So why do you call it the intersection?" I was like, "Well, it's the intersection of politics, religion, and also technology." And
mhm,
so they would say, "So why religion?" And so then it was just like this mind shift where I did have some people tell me like, they look kind of like, I don't know if that's going to work. And I'm like, I know, but I think it will. So
and I mean, you're still here, and so that definitely, it's working in some
right,
way, shape, or form, you know?
right, right, right.
I wanted to go back to code switching a little bit. You talked at Google News that you had to learn how to sort of package yourself for different spaces. And so I'm
Mhm.
interested in that, but I'm also, it reminds me of work you've done with Humanities DC and the Community Journalism Project, which is really, taking concerned members of the public and helping them in some ways like repackage themselves as journalists and
Yeah.
writers.
Hmm.
And so if I can make this like a triple part question, just so we all know where we're going, um,
Right.
how did it feel at Google News? What are you doing with the Community Journalism Project? And then how does that translate to, you don't write everything for the site, you have different people coming in. So how does
Hmm.
that relate to how you actually get coverage for the site?
Okay. Let me see. Let
And
me see.
don't worry, but that's just the sketch of where I wanna go, so I'll
Right,
remind
right,
us
right.
along the way.
Right. Thank you. So I think being in the space of like the Google News Initiative, one, there was other African American publishers there. So that was actually helpful and things like that. But I also think that like cultures are cultures, and like I think that we're always moving in and out of cultures, especially when you get into like subcultures and things like that. And
Mhm.
so my college, actually going to a HBCU, actually helped me with that, because the HBCU I went to, you have all these black people from around the world,
Do
but
you wanna give a shout
not,
out? Which college did you
oh,
attend?
I went to Paul Quinn, the great Paul Quinn College, the
Woohoo.
oldest HBCU west of the Mississippi River. So
Oh, wow, okay.
yeah. And so being in that space, like the different kind of cultures that exist within the black diaspora, like we had folk who were there, like we had folk from Haiti who spoke French. That was my first time engaging somebody from Haiti, right? And
Mhm.
we had folk from Jamaica, we had folk from Africa. I'm from Maryland. Maryland is not the same as LA, right? It's
No, indeed.
those, right? You gotta learn. I mean, really, like we will all be at the table, and you're literally hearing all these different kinds of dialects,
Mhm,
and so you have to engage them as they are. So I think being at HBCU actually helped me with that.
mhm.
So I wasn't really shocked, and so but just in terms of business, like learning that business language in that
Sure.
particular space, was a thing that was like, okay, I can do this. Like, I had to learn how to present. When I was at the Mena Institute, we had to do like mock presentations, like 30-second. I think it was like 2-minute presentations or whatever,
Mhm,
um, in front of like potential grantors. And that was my first time I did that, and I didn't do well, but I
mhm,
learned a lot. Um, and so I think going through those exercises over and over and over again has made me better at it,
mhm.
so I think that's what it is. And what was your other question about?
Well, and so, I also sometimes think about that idea of moving through cultures is something or in different communities is something that journalists do all the
Right,
time.
right.
And I think it was last year or the year before, you worked with Humanities DC on their
Right.
community journalism project. And
Mhm.
so like, sometimes when you move between cultures, you're, like, exploding myths about either the culture that you come from or your own conceptions of what somebody else is coming from, and so, like, that idea of stepping members of the public, and I think there were, like, a dozen or a dozen people in that cohort.
Right.
How do you explain what you do, and how do you help them sort of go through their own process of code switching into journalism worlds.
Oh, dang, that's a good question. So I think yeah, so I think it was that that whole process is not unlike the process I went through myself,
Mhm,
right? Every journalist I think has to go through it. Like you're like, I want to be a journalist, and then you're like, you sign up, you jump on, and you're like, oh, I did not. It's this initial shock of like, I did not know that I actually needed to talk to people. I just wanted to write,
yeah,
right? And so we had some folk in the cohort that was like that, and so it was really not only me, but also the other trainers. George, who was the lead teacher,
mhm,
he actually did a really good job of laying the foundation every week. Like every week, he just was like nailing it. Like we are here to do journalism. Like we are here to do journalism. Like this is the container of journalism that we're working inside of. And so there were 3 trainers and I was one of those trainers. And so when we had our group meetings the following week, it is me just really jumping off of what he said and adding more, and also listening to their questions and concerns, right?
mhm.
And listening to those as best as I could, being patient and walking them through that process and saying, hey, like, I understand what you're saying. Here's the gap that you're feeling. And that gap is fine because as journalists, we still feel that gap. Like,
Mhm,
well, I'll give you one example. It was one, they had to go and do their interviews and then write the story. And so a lot of the questions was like, this process really feels like undone. Like it's just like you can't like hammer it down. Like, yes, you have your questions, but then when you get in the interview, it could just go right. Like
People are gonna say what they're gonna say.
right, right. Like I was like, right, you can't control what people are going to say. How do you deal with that? Right.
Mhm,
And just reassuring them and normalizing is like, okay, the feelings that you're feeling about this is normal, right? This does feel undone. This doesn't feel like it's settled. It's not like your normal job when you go in every day. It's like I have these set of things that I need to do. It's like, no, like sometimes you get into these interviews and you're doing them and you don't know how to respond to certain things, or you have all this information and now you got to put it in a article. How do you
right.
do that? And so we walked through that process slowly. It was a lot of phone calls, a lot of texting and things like that. And so yeah, I think it was just at the end of the day, I think it was George, who was the lead teacher, laying that foundation so that
Mhm,
we as trainers had something to lean back on and to jump off, right?
mhm,
Um, and it was very much a community oriented thing. So I wasn't, as a trainer, I wasn't left by myself just to train my cohort, right?
right.
George was always available to come in and reinforcing the same things in a kind and patient manner, and things like that. So yeah, I think that's what it was. It was just um, walking alongside them
Mhm,
and help and answering the same questions that I also had when I was a young journalist,
mhm.
right? And empathizing with that. I think that played a bigger role too.
So, what do you think were kind of the top couple questions that members of the public had about either the journalism process or what it means to, you know, have an active journalism or be a journalist?
Right. I think some of it was story framing
Mhm.
was a really huge thing. Um, so I remember when we talked about story framing. So what I did was I took two stories, same stories written by two different publications, and I put that before them. And they read it out loud. And then we had a discussion about that. And one of the questions that came out of that was, well, how do we know which one is telling the truth?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Mhm. Like, how do we know like which framework is right? And I was like, oh, that's the question. How do we know that? How do you think this journalist got to what? And so then we talked about the voice of different publications. Different
Mhm.
publications have different voices. Um, it doesn't mean that what they actually were writing was false, but the way that they frame different stories, the framework becomes the most one of the most important things when I'm talking about journalism.
Mm.
Um, some of the things we also talked about, at least in this iteration of where we are politically, was how do you deal with causing harm in community, right? So if 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 reporting on this thing could cause harm to the community that you're reporting on, ethically as a journalist, should you report on that?
These were some deep questions. This is not about, like, how many sources do I need to write my
Yeah,
story? Like, this is
right,
deep.
right, right. I mean, those were questions too, like, okay, what if I reached out to this source and they didn't get back to me? What do I do about that? Should I keep doing it? And it was like, yes, and it was like, but I don't want to, right? Like,
Right, I've
I,
already
like,
called them once.
right, right. And so, what if I don't? And so then it was sometimes this fear of like, I think they needed a minimum of like 3 sources, and then it
Mhm,
was like, "But what if I don't get this source from my story?" I was like, "So what are we gonna do about that? How are we gonna go through the process of getting another source?" So it's
mhm,
like walking through those things. We talked about sourcing, what was a good source, what was a bad source. How do you learn to trust the source? How do you even know you can trust the source, right?
mhm.
Where are they getting their information from? So it was all these deep that was deep. Those are just the questions in my cohort. I don't even know what the other 2 I can't even tell you what the other 2 trainers were talking to their cohorts about, but just in my cohort alone, like, we had some really good conversation about, harm and, um, are journalists complicit if they report on something that could be
Mhm.
harmful to the community and something ends up happening to that community? So, yeah, those are really real questions, yeah.
And I love how thoughtful those questions are. Like, these are people who really take their community seriously and
Right,
wanna work through it. And so were you I know some of the, graduates or participants in the Humanities DC Community Journalism Program went on to submit writing to various publications. Did
right.
you and I know you have a fair number of contributors because, you're not doing it all yourself.
Mhm.
Were you able to utilize any of that work, and how do you utilize the community in your in your reporting?
Oh, that's a good question. So first, because I was a trainer, I couldn't use any of their stuff.
Okay.
Their contracts were committed to the Humanities DC, who acted also as a liaison between the DC publications, which would be like the Washington City newspaper, the Washington Informer. I think the Afro
Mhm,
News was one of them, And then the DC Humanities has a magazine that they also publish some of the stories in. So yeah, so
Oh, cool.
I personally
Mhm.
couldn't. There would be like a conflict of interest if I did that.
Right, that makes
So yeah,
sense.
yeah. So, but yeah, some of them actually got published. They got their first articles published in those spaces, um, and I'm happy for them. They did a great job. Um, I think for me, the way that I utilize the community is the way that I think the way that it shows up in my reporting is that I often get people from the community, from Prince George's County, like texting me, um, passing along information and things like that, giving me tips. I get invited to cover things like, so for instance, last week, no, on Saturday, sorry, I got invited to go to Baltimore to report on the Maryland Lynching Project's eighth annual conference.
Mhm.
So I was there, and they call me, I guess, because they trust me to report on it. So,
That's
so
great.
I want to report on that, and so that's usually how it shows up.
Mhm.
Um, I think not unlike any other journalist who does this job. I think what I would like to do is like maybe provide a space one day where community members could come and we could just have a conversation about what is covered and what do they feel like is still not being covered,
Mhm.
and just have that very real one-to-one connection with them. I'm still trying to figure out how to make that happen. So
Yeah. No, I love that. And that kinda led me to my last question is what's next for the Intersection magazine and for you?
right. That's a good question. So um one thing I would like to do is to expand the amount of reporters that I have.
Mhm.
So I'm currently working on that. Um One thing I would like to do is to become a local investigative news organization
Okay.
in the county. I think that has been like my goal from the beginning, which is why I think I set out to do narrative form reporting because it's kind of laying those seeds from the beginning.
Mhm.
So I think I think the future of the Intersection magazine is investigative reporting, mhm,
I love that.
and
Well
expanding coverage. Yeah.
well, and it is hard as a kind of a single operator. It's hard to kind of feed the magazine and investigate and fundraise, and so some
Right.
capacity building's probably in order as well. Well, and I can't wait
Yeah,
to hear more.
absolutely.
Can't wait to hear more about it. I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and when interesting things come along, we'll talk about it. So, thank you so
Yeah.
much for being here today and sharing a little bit more. So, it's the intersectionmag.com, correct?
Y Yes, ma'am. Yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
great. Well, thank you, Delonte. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed myself.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.